good.
Yeah?
I like it a lot. It's why I don't know.
What you do is put one of these under.
I don't know how you feel
Some
about
of these
it.
don't have the. How do you put the? Is there like a thing that holds it up together?
There's supposed to be two
Yeah.
wires on
Oh, that.
Yeah.
That holds the whole thing.
So let's make sure there's
Yeah.
It's like, as long as they say hello on the way by.
I'm reading it right now in Spanish. It's so good. I would make it English. My Spanish is good enough that I could totally read it, but I paraphrase everything. I'm trying to read it in Spanish. That's a better way to say it. No, it's so good, but it's so sad. It's funny because I thought I would like to write because I've worked with teenagers. Like, I read all the time, like, oh, wow, I get it. Like, oh. And the thing is too, like we all went through that age. So you can like right? Right. A long time ago. But right? Well, I wish there were things like that. Oh my god.
One of them is yeah, that's good. Two. Or two or something like that.
Yeah.
It's great to have our guest pianist this morning, Dan Cater. Great to have you here, Dan.
My pleasure, thank you.
I'm Joel Miller. I'm the interim minister here at the Morristown Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. So grateful to welcome you here this morning. And usually I don't do this, but this morning seemed like the right time. Maybe turn your phones on to silent, or better yet, maybe even turn it off. If my sermon gets really boring, just try not to let me see you scrolling. So it was a couple of years ago. I was back in Berkeley, California, where I had gone to our theological school out there, the Thomas Starr King School for the Ministry. And there was this coffee shop I used to go to with all of my my cohort, my classmates at the theological school, other folks studying to be Unitarian Universalist ministers. And we would go to this coffee shop just up the street from our theological school. And it was a busy place. It was always noisy, and sometimes people would be so excited about what they were talking about, or they would be having so much fun that they would laugh really loudly and you couldn't even hear yourself talking to other people until it died out again, and then everybody'd start talking again. And it was a lot of fun. I went back to visit. My son and his wife had moved to Berkeley, and I thought, I'm going to show them around Berkeley because I knew some things about it. And we stopped in the coffee shop. I wanted to show them a place where I'd been many times and met all kinds of interesting people. It was really quiet. It was so quiet. It was bizarre. Everybody was looking at their laptop or their phone, and nobody was talking to anybody. And the thing that worried me a little bit is I looked at my son and I said, it was never like this before. And everybody looked up at me like I was in a library. My son said to me, Dad, that was awkward. So we ordered coffee. I thought about maybe we could sit inside and have coffee because there was some funny art in the place that was fun to look at. And I realized, well, not only would it be awkward if I start talking, but my stomach was a little upset that day and I might burp, and it was so quiet, everybody would have heard it. So we went and sat outside, and we were much less awkward outside. But it felt so awkward to me not to be able to just sit in a coffee shop and talk to all the interesting people in there who were not talking to each other and were looking at screens. So I'm thinking a lot about what it is to be connected to each other and how it is to be in a public place and talking and sometimes often feeling awkward, and how it is sometimes that we just want some quiet, private time, because both are good things and both have their place. Good morning. Welcome to the fellowship. Our services this morning, online and here in person.
Welcome, new friends and old. Welcome to our shared journey of the Spirit. We are grateful for you to be with us today. I'm Susie Harris, this morning's worship associate, so I'm so pleased to welcome you to this morning's service. We're a spiritual community that appreciates the importance of transition, the transitions each generation makes from birth, childhood, youth, adulthood, and elders. This is why we cherish our children, our youth, and our elders, and learn to depend on each other as we grow and change. We know that the cooing babies here, and sometimes even wailing babies, will someday be our teachers and our activists for justice, or care for us when we're hurting and healing, or singing or speaking to us to raise our spirits. As we cherish our elders who have built and nourished the spiritual home for us, and the mentoring we need from them in the wisdom of their years. If children and youth and families have questions about our religious education program, Nick Walwork is our Director of Religious Education, and our new season of religious education programming has begun, as Nick is pleased to talk with you and answers questions about it. You can find out more about our choir from our choir director, Michael Rosen. He is out today sick, but we do welcome Dan Cater. It's great to see you, Dan. Our AV technical director is Alex West, and our congregational administrator is Katie Julik. And you can send her an email if you have any questions or if you have any suggestions or whatever. She likes to get emails. And Reverend Joel Miller is our interim minister. We have a lot of announcements in our order of service and online. Today after service, I'd like to highlight that at 11:45, the Green Earth Ministry is going to be holding a workshop on electrifying your house. So it's not an Edison workshop, it's about how to get some of your costs reduced for your house. The endowment committee is out in the Great Hall today, following all the services in January, and they'll answer questions about a grant proposal process. And they'll have proposal forms. So if you have an idea for the fellowship, talk to them about it. Oh, yes? Oh, talk to Janet. She's there in red. So look for her if you have a great idea for the fellowship and would like funding for it. And Reverend Joel Miller is hosting a visitor work information center in his office on the second floor after service, and all are welcome to attend. So welcome, welcome, welcome.
Chalice is a centuries-old symbol for Unitarians and now Universalists, a symbol of a people gathered in community and in search of the spirit of love. I invite you to share in this morning's affirmation with me. Love is the spirit of this fellowship, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And we sing now, Lady of the Season's Laughter.
Winter
If you're a child or youth or you're young at heart, like me sometimes, I'd invite you to come up here and join me on the chancel. I have a time for all ages and a story I'd like to share about the service today. Thank you guys for coming up. Been kind of cold out, hasn't it? Did you guys have to go to school on Friday? Oh, you did? Yeah. I thought you didn't have to, though, huh? There were some schools that were closed. It was so cold. Look at that. Hello there. We have some friends. Our lovies, yeah. I'm glad you brought your lovies. I think I told a story the other day about a lovey I had when I was little. It was very important to me. Talking about a different kind of love this morning. One of the things we talk about when we do the affirmation at the beginning of the service, love is the spirit of this fellowship. One day, I was in my office. At the time, I was serving another congregation, one in a different city. And it was, the building was actually downtown in the city. And there was this woman who used to come and stand on the corner next to the congregation I was serving, and she would yell a lot. She yelled for many hours sometimes, and I couldn't quite tell what she was saying, but I knew she wasn't feeling well and that she was having a hard time thinking in a way that was helpful for her. One day I was trying to write a sermon, and it's hard to pay attention and write when somebody's always screaming loudly and they're mad. So I decided I would go down and see how she was doing. I was a little nervous because, sometimes when people are yelling loud, maybe they're not very safe, but I told the director of religious education, the person who does what Nick does, and I told the person in the office, I'm going to go out and see what this person might not yell for a little while. So I went out and I walked up to her, and she was looking at me like, oh no, what's going to happen now? I was feeling the same way, I got to tell you. And so I walked up to her and I said, hi. And she stopped yelling all of a sudden. And she said, hi. And I said, I'm Joel. What's your name? I'm Jean. And I said, hi, Jean. I'm trying to do some work upstairs, and I wonder if you could stop yelling so loudly for a while. And she said, no, I can't. The voices won't stop, and the only way I can put up with it is to keep yelling. And I said, oh, that sounds really hard, Jean. And she finally relaxed a little bit, and she said, you bet it's hard. She said, I can go somewhere else. That would be great, Jean, if you would do that for now. She says, okay. And then she started yelling really loudly again, and she walked off, and then she turned around while she was yelling and waved at me, and I waved back. I went back into the office, and the director of religious education and the office manager looked at me, and they were like, what happened? And I said, I found out her name is Jean. And I said asked her if she'd yell somewhere else because she can't stop yelling. And so she said, okay. The next Sunday, there were some kids at Sunday school, and she was yelling on the corner right before the services were going to start. And some of them said, that crazy lady's yelling again. And they were saying some kind of mean things about her. And I said, her name is Jean, and she really can't stop yelling. She wants to, but she really can't. I went to the grocery store later, and the manager of the grocery store said, you sent that woman into the grocery store the other day, and she was yelling. And I said, oh, sorry. I just needed some quiet. And he said, yeah, I can understand that. And I said, her name is Jean. And the manager said, I didn't know that. Huh. So the word started to get around that her name was Jean. And then a couple of weeks later, she wasn't around. There was no one yelling anymore. But you know, what was interesting was it was the kids in the church that noticed they hadn't seen Jean. And they had actually even gone up to her because Jean was not going to hurt anybody. And I knew that. And so they felt, they'd asked me, can we talk to Jean? And I said, sure. So they would go up, and she would look at them, and she'd be yelling, and they'd say, hi, Jean. And she would stop and go, hi. But she wasn't yelling, at least for a minute. But then they didn't know where she was. The manager at the grocery store said, nobody here knows where she is. We didn't see her for a couple of weeks. We were kind of worried about her because we knew she didn't have anywhere to go. She slept behind that church. Don't tell anybody I said that. But she didn't have anywhere else to go. And then the kids saw her again. She had a different cart. She had different things. Something had happened. But she was back in the neighborhood. She wasn't yelling as much. But when the kids saw her, they ran up to her and they said, Jean, Jean, we haven't seen you for 2 weeks. Are you okay? We were worried about you. And Jean started crying. And she said, I didn't know anybody cared about me that much. Turns out a lot of people cared about her. What was really lovely about that was it was after that Jean felt like it might be okay to get more help with those voices that were in her head that she didn't want. And she finally found a place to live and a way to settle down. I think the kids had something to do with that. I wanted to share that story with you. It's a story I call Her Name Was Jean. Sometimes it's a good thing to know each other's names. Thank you for coming up and letting me share that story this morning. Appreciate it. You can go back and sit with your folks. What's our next song? Darker Winter. Okay, good. One of the ways we have of being together is to share our milestones, to share moments in our life that have become big transitions for us, to share moments of success, moments of difficulty, and also as an important spiritual practice, one that we should always begin every spiritual practice with gratitude. Milestones this morning that I'd like to share. A lot of milestones around COVID. Paul Firm called me last night, and he sounded, I can't even do his voice. He sounded like this. Probably has COVID. Michael Rosin's not here today. Thanks for coming in, Dan. And Michael probably has COVID. And we know that others also have COVID. Bob and Irene Scott also have COVID. It's going around. And may we all heal well and quickly, and may there be no long COVID. And a gratitude this morning for warm home and a warm, loving congregation. I invite us to sit comfortably, to have our feet comfortably on the ground, and to share in a moment of prayer or meditation or contemplation as fits your own theology and spiritual practices. Before we enter into silence, may we remember the many connections that sustain us, that lift us up in community, in the world around us. Remember that there are those who came before us here, in our families, in our communities. Their contributions helped us grow and become the people we are and are becoming. Their contributions built streets and schools and hospitals in which we find care and health. Their contributions built what we call a free faith, this home for the practice of a spirituality that helps us grow as individuals and as a people. We remember those around us in this moment, those whose continuing care in work and thought and support is an ongoing blessing in our lives. Those who help us raise our children, those who help us reach out in times of struggle, those who keep the dream alive of a world of love and freedom. And we can't help but remember those who are going to follow us. The sound, even now, of their voices as they are here in our care, learning how wonderful this life is and can be, learning the importance of community, and how what we do here together and on our own is what builds the world in which they will find happiness and freedom. For all of these gifts that surround us now, surrounded by such beauty, such deep possibilities, visible and invisible, let our meditations remind us we have not been and we are not alone. For all we bring, have brought, and will bring, may it bring us to peace, to the practice of love, and may we grant each other freedom. Blessed be, so be it. Amen. Sing together. Felt like Dark of the Winter would be a good one to sing, even though it's pretty bright and sunny at the moment. But you know, there are times that I found that it's really nice to have moments that are winter-like in our own lives, when we perhaps are in some moment of solitude and the seeds of what our lives are becoming are quietly within, as we allow ourselves moments of darkness, of coolness, of preparation. Dark of winter. Brenda Shaughnessy is a poet, born in 1970. She was born in Okinawa, which is an island close to Japan, but she was adopted and raised in Southern California. I think this experience she had of growing up as a person who came from Okinawa, was born there, but then was living in Southern California with no one who was from Okinawa. I think it was a very different experience for her than most of us have had when we grew up. This is her poem, Identity and Community. There is no I in C. I don't want to be surrounded by people, or even one person. But I don't always want to be alone. The answer is to become my own pet, hungry for plenty in a plentiful place. There is no solitude, only. At Seaside, I have that familiar sense of being left out. Too far out to understand how go in. What an inhuman surface the sea has. It's always open, and I'm afraid to go in. I give no yes. Full of shame, I pick myself up. Wind has power, sun has power. What is the source of the power? There's no privacy outside. We invaded it. There's no life outside empire. All paradise is performance for people who pay. And maybe I'm an invader, and I feel I haven't paid. What a waste. I'm watching 3 mom-like women going into the sea. I want to join them. But they're not my women. I join them, apologizing. They splash away from me. They're their pod. I'm alien. I'm an unknown story, erasing myself with seawater. I am that queer thing pulling and greener than the blue sea. Beauty washing over itself. No reflection, no claim, nothing to see. And if there's anything bluer than the ocean, it's greenness. The ocean, its turquoise blood mixing me. Well, I was a woman alone in that sea. Don't tell anybody, I tell myself. Don't try to remember this. Don't write a poem about it. Remember, write it down, not to document it.
Today we had scheduled an offertory by Drive the Cold Winter Away. It's a folk song. Marjorie's ill today, so she's not going to sing it today, but we'll look forward to that in the future. We're going to be taking the offertory. The ushers will come around, and today's offertory will be split 50-50 with New Jersey Together. They work to develop leaders and strengthen communities and seek justice in New Jersey. You can text to give. So you text it, put in the number 73256 with the keywords MUUF. Oh, it's up there. With the dollar amount, or you can give online. So thank you for your generosity.
I was about 8 years old when I was walking to school, and then I'd walk back home after school, and I liked walking to school. It was an interesting walk. I'd walk through my neighborhood up to school, and then I'd walk past all the neighborhood shops and stores and go to school, and then I'd come back. And usually when I was coming back, I'd take my time going back home because there were all kinds of things to see. I'd like to stop in all the different shops. There was an appliance store. There was a Radio Shack. I always liked the technical equipment and the pieces of electronics you could buy in little packages. And there was a pharmacy. I went to all the different shops and would have a look around. One day I stopped into the pharmacy. It was this lovely local pharmacy. Had medicines, of course, but it also had first aid, and it had soaps. It had a aisle for makeup. It also had a candy counter. I don't remember what I was thinking that one day when I was 8. I put a package of gum in my pocket and left without paying. Not a good thing. And some of you are reacting the right way, like, oh no, Joel, that was not good. It was not good. Now, the pharmacist saw me. And the pharmacist, being a neighborhood pharmacist, he knew who my dad was. He called my dad up. My dad called my mom up. And when I got home, she said, so tell me about the gum. I bought it? No. She said, now you're in double trouble. You already spent your allowance this week, so I know you couldn't have bought it. Did you steal it? She gave me a second chance to tell the truth. Yes, I said. We do not steal, she said to me emphatically. And she said, I'm going to advance you next week's allowance, and we're going back to the pharmacy, and you're going to pay for that gum, and you're going to apologize. Paying for the gum sounded like, oh, that sounds like a good thing, because I think Mom's right. I don't think I want to be one of those people that steals. But I got to apologize? Oh my God, that's going to be so awkward. I said, do I have to? Oh yes, she said, we don't steal. I paid for the gum, and then I apologized to the checkout clerk, and then I apologized to the pharmacist. It was good and awkward. It was the right kind of awkward. And I'm grateful for my parents' loving discipline. So it was years later when I was reading a writer named Ruth Cook, and she describes a similar time when she was many years ago now in a store with her parents, and she stole a toy. And when she got home with her mother saw the toy and said, we don't steal. Same exact thing my parents said to me. And she had to go back and apologize and return the toy. 90 years after that had happened, Ruth Cook wrote, the experience was still vivid in her memory, and it had always been a part of her solitude. Now, I find that phrase really interesting. It was a part of her sense of just being alone with herself. That's what she meant by solitude. And you know, that was my experience of the time my mom took me to the pharmacy, and I had to apologize. I've never told this story in public before. This is my first time. It was for me, like Ruth Cook, a public lesson at first, but then I got to keep it in private. And it was always there in the back of my head. We don't steal. We treat our neighbors with respect, with love. You know, in the Western social tradition, we have public lives and we have private lives. And I had the opportunity as a child to experience that balance between public and private. I had the privacy of being able to walk home and walk however I wanted to get home. But when I did something that affected someone else, I suddenly had a public life, one I hadn't been expecting. And I had to apologize in a very public way to the people I'd hurt. And that's been a part of the Western culture for many, many centuries. this practice we have of creating community, public community and private community. And if we're lucky, we get to have a healthy sense of both in our lives. So as public people, we vote. Maybe we run for office. Or maybe we work as a polling officer during election day. Maybe we organize a community association. Or we're on the board of our congregation, our fellowship, our church, our synagogue, our temple, our ashram. And then there's that other part of life, the private life, the place we protect and protect for each other, places where love happens, childhood happens, family life, romantic love, friendships. These two lives are interconnected. They're connected to one another, they balance one another, and yet there has to be a healthy balance, even a boundary between the two. I learned the importance of where this boundary has to come because I was, in 1999, the minister of the Columbine Unitarian Universalist Church. And it was a block away from some violence that happened at the school up the street on April 19th, 1999. I saw a lot. And in the days that followed, it became clear that I'd seen a lot because I was interviewed on national television several times. I had, when the violence started there, put on a clerical collar. There aren't too many times ministers wear one of those little collars with a little white box on it. I had one. At the time, it was still fairly new, but I wore it so infrequently it eventually got holy. Bad pun, sorry. But I'd put the collar on, and I'd gone to where the police had set up the staging for rescuing students, figuring out what happened, and protecting the neighborhood. People all over the United States wanted to know what had this minister seen. But one of the things this morning that's important to share with you is that, first of all, I learned from those experiences that summer when I had begun to travel around and people would, if I went in to pay for gas or had gone grocery shopping while I was vacationing with my family, people would see my driver's license as I paid with a check or a credit card, and they'd go, "Littleton, Colorado, were you there?" And I would say, "Yes." And they would be surprised and shocked and very caring about it, but they would feel like they'd been there too and felt free to comment on what the experience was like. Let me tell you something. If you've seen it on TV or you watch it on your laptop or you watch it on your phone, you weren't there. And some of the coverage then, and I've noticed that sometimes what's posted about people now on something like YouTube or Instagram or TikTok, not only not accurate, but not even fair, invasive even. In fact, those of us who lived in the neighborhood at the time were really angry at some of the media because they had crossed that boundary between public and private. The line was crossed when there were broadcast images of people who could be identified by name in their moments of suffering and terror. And the neighborhood, all the way from really conservative evangelical on the right to all the way on Unitarian Universalist congregation on the left, we were united about one thing. There weren't many, but we were angry about this and united around it. So when the next fall the students came back to the high school, everybody in the neighborhood came and we surrounded the students. We literally surrounded the school with well over 1,000 people and were in the way of the cameras because we just wanted the kids to be able to go back to school and have a good day and not be on TV. Some of the media had crossed the line. They'd intruded upon the private realm that wasn't theirs to intrude on. Not all did. I was interviewed by the Today Show on NBC, and they were so ethical and compassionate. I was so impressed by them. I'm always grateful for the ethical journalism that is still around. And I know the damage that the unethical non-journalists, the propagandists, can cause. We need, as public people living public lives, we need ethical reporting. Because when a police officer responds to something, it's a public event. We have a right, we have a responsibility in a democracy to know how our government serves us and to correct it when it's not doing its job right. And, for example, stealing, even when it's an 8-year-old, is still a public act because it affects others. If we're lucky, we learn early how to have a public life worthy of our neighbors and our own lives. And privacy, the protected part of our lives, where so many important things happen. Romance flowers in our private lives. Romance holds the fragile beginnings of new life in a womb, in a uterus. Privacy screens our imperfections. Imperfections that, if we understand them and leave them in the quiet and gentle places of our unconscious, somehow might even be transformed into strengths without having to burden our neighbors with the journey. I'm pretty familiar with this myself because I'm an alcoholic. Now I've been sober for 32 and a half years. I'm very grateful for that. One of the things I can tell you is that other alcoholics have been very, very helpful to me. We meet and talk with each other about how to stay sober, how to enjoy life, how to be grateful, how to understand the difference between our privacy and our public lives. And it's very important to care for one another's privacy when we meet. We don't talk about who we were at a meeting with. It's not anyone else's business. And there's a reason for that, because if there's suddenly we're exposed to the world and we're not ready, the public gaze upon our flawed and troubled lives can cause the people around us to confuse us with those flaws. And eventually, we become confused ourselves that we are our flaws. I was given privacy by other people who had more experience on this journey, and that allowed me to nurture a new life, a healthier life, a life no longer defined by my pain, but instead defined by my connections, by my aspirations. As public beings, we protect each other's privacy. It's part of our obligations as public people. Privacy for all of us, it's the clothing of our souls. It's the gentleness with which we learn to listen to an inner voice. Who am I? How will I be in this world? If we're a theist this morning here, perhaps as we prayed, our prayer was where the still small voice of the holy was speaking to us. Or if we're not a theist, maybe a humanist or a Buddhist, it may have been a moment in that quiet inner garden where we hear the voice of compassion speaking, compassion for self and others. And for any of us, as lovers, privacy holds our desires, fragile, powerful. And for all of us, in our moments as children, privacy allows us, the fantasies of pretend allows us to imagine. And public beings. Our public life needs the same protection as the private lives we have need that protection. We sign contracts. We cast votes. We lobby. We learn how to get along with our neighbors, especially the ones that are more difficult. And so why tell you all of this morning? Being part of a congregation is a great way to understand who are we as public people and who are we as private people. So, for example, our children are going to take OWL our whole lives. It's a way for them to learn how to have sexually healthy lives. And at some point, we'll teach adult OWL too, because it's something we're all always learning about. We're caring for each other in the private aspect of our lives with a course like Our Whole Lives. But we're also learning to be public beings, because a fundamental principle of Unitarian Universalism is democracy, the democratic process, that our voices are heard. And as public beings, we learn that when we're in a small group, let's say, we know we keep confidences about what we hear in the small group. And in the same way, we learn that it's important for each of us to serve the public good of the community in the way that is right for each of us. And we learn that when we speak in public, we have to be responsible for the words we put out to the congregation as a whole. We learn that making anonymous public pronouncements actually not so ethical. And this is why I got to thinking, I wanted to tell you about another reason I think that who you are and how you have been in the world is so important to the community, to these young people who are growing up, and to your lives as well. The world needs this fellowship. Let me really back off a little bit and look at this from a great distance. In 1951, the philosopher Hannah Arendt, she was analyzing the middle of the century, the terrible dictatorships of Hitler and Stalin. She wrote about how dictators and strong men like these two people want us to be afraid of each other. She described, for example, how communism punished people for having private lives. No one in communism was supposed to have a private life. Everything was open to public scrutiny. Your neighbor could comment on anything about your life because everyone had to conform to the one true Leninist, Maoist, Stalinist, whateverist model of the one true truth. Pretty unpleasant way to live, my Unitarian Universalist perspective. And she turned it on its head, too, and described how right-wing dictators punish people not for private behavior, but for public behavior. Hitler and the Nazis punished anyone for anything they did that was in public, that did not match what der Führer wanted them to do or think. So, having a public life where one voiced an opinion or lobbied, say, today for affordable housing. If you created a neighborhood association and you hadn't gotten prior permission, you would be punished for it because all of these public deeds, the only public voice in a right-wing dictatorship is the voice of the glorious leader. All other public voices are suppressed and punished. Ironically, with usually a privatized trial, or maybe just even a privatized disappearance. So stepping back a little bit and looking at the historical trends of why authoritarians want to annihilate the difference between a private life and a public life, because they want us to be afraid. They want us to be afraid to speak out, but they want us to be afraid to share and be friends with one another, to have a private life and friendships. And I think it's harder times to learn these distinctions. I think it was easier when I was growing up, to be honest. If I hadn't told you the story about stealing the gum, nobody in the world would ever have known I did it. Yeah, I paid the pharmacy for what I took. I apologized. These public acts in front of the people who were in the pharmacy at the time. Everybody got to watch. Everybody approved. I learned a lot about who I wanted to be and where I came from. I've done my best to live an honest life since then, and I'm going to be slightly awkward in the fact I knew I was going to be awkward sharing the story with you. I hope it was helpful. But growing up these days is harder. It's so much harder. Maybe somebody would take their camera out and record you having to make your public apology, and 20 years later when you are going to graduate school and somebody shows it to the admissions committee. Really? And we post things trying to have a private life, one that connects us with people who might even be far away, which I think is really cool, except that everything we post and share on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, we don't own it. Some guy, probably a guy, some tech bro owns it. Social media is not so good for our public lives or our private lives. They won't even distribute what we say as public people if it's not profitable to them. And that's not what a public communal life that we share, not something we need. And we just came out of the pandemic, right? We spent a lot of time home, some of us alone, some of us with just a couple of people. We're social beings. We evolved to be connected to one another. So I was noticing as we came out of the pandemic, and I was thinking, what do we need to do in fellowship life to restore our connections and ways of being with one another? And that's when I got to thinking about that experience I had with my son and his wife when I went into that cafe. I was very surprised as we were sitting out on that bench and he was saying, being awkward is considered socially unacceptable. And something? I was really shocked by that because I've got a little awkward in me. I think all y'all have a little awkward in you. In fact, I grew up understanding we all are awkward at times. And that's not a bad thing, it just kind of is. It's not good or bad. What we do is we have public rituals or private rituals where we help each other through the awkward. Hi, my name is Joel. What's your name? And we have these ways of just connecting to each other that makes it easier to get past the awkward, to figure out, who am I with? How are we going to connect in a way that's comfortable for us both? I learned to be polite. Polite was always a good solution for all the awkward moments that are inevitable. So, I don't know. I use this a lot. I'm not going to say stop using it. I'm not going to say don't connect with your friends. I got to talk with my cousin just yesterday. She had some important things to talk about. I was really glad for the phone. The fact that we could text for a little while before we called. Some of the stuff was going to be too hard to say in words. So I'm thinking about all of you as the Morristown Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. You have gone through so many changes in the last 8 years, especially the last 4 pandemics, building an awesome new addition, the governance system your board talks about, the changes an interim minister brings. It's a lot. I know it's a lot. And I want to say to you, what I know that you have, this just almost instinctive now understanding of what it means to be public people and private people, and to care for each other as public people, and care for one another in your privacy. You understand this in a way that much of our culture does not. And you understand it in a way because you practice it not just in terms of community relationship, but you practice it as a principle of your democratic process. You exist as a community and function democratically. It's a skill that needs practice, and it's a skill we learn. So when Ruth Cook broke her hip, I mentioned her earlier, she was like me, her mom took her and made her apologize, return the toy she stole. 90 years later, despite her age, she'd broken her hip. 3 weeks later, she was back at a bookstore she owned, and her customers, who adored her, were surprised to see her back so soon. "You just broke your hip, I think. Are you okay?" And she'd say, "Oh, that was just 3 weeks ago. I'm fine now." Now, y'all know it takes longer than that to get your hip to heal, but in the moment, what she and her customers knew, there was the compassion of her as a public person, owner of a bookstore, and her experience as a private person who just really wanted to heal without having to comment on it a lot. And it was an easy balance for her and the community around her. She knew they loved and cared for her, and she didn't have to tell them the gory details. I want this for my children and their generation. They need it. They need you. This is why I tell you about this public and private. Our young adults today, studies show that they are more lonely than our oldest elders. That's unheard of in history. We have been pushed apart, some by the forces of social media, some by political forces. Some wannabe autocrats and dictators and those who finance them. They're trying to push us apart. Another reason, your community needs you. We have something for the generations yet to come to help them thrive and continue the work of freedom and love in the world. And how will they find us? They will find a place welcoming with space for them. You've made such a huge dedication and commitment to them. And when they walk in the doors, they'll see we don't just allow each other to believe however we want, because that's really not what we're doing. The heartfelt beliefs, so very different, we bring. We don't just put them on like a hat we want one morning. We bring our beliefs deeply felt and share them with one another. Somehow take what is so private and learn to make it public. And instead of getting a response from, say, the minister, "Oh, you shouldn't believe, oh, you have a belief that's not right." No. We will ask each other, do you want to believe in a way that we bless one another's lives? Taking this most intimate, private experience and making it bless the whole world in a most public way. What an amazing spiritual practice. Let us bring our most soulful beliefs, the ones we hold most dear, and know that as we share them with our trembling hearts, we will be loved and cared for. Perhaps, yes, challenged. And in a time of change, perhaps it feels like so much to do. The world needs you. The world needs you to be doing this practice as well as all your other ones: gratitude, generosity, remembering, celebrating. We come here and we practice the journey to a common good. And may the spiritual path that you know and understand so well continue to be an example for the community and the world around us, and for our people who need it, who long for it, even though they may not know it yet. Invite them in. They need you. Let us continue to build the public good. What are we singing now? All the Beautiful March of Days. If you like to look at the hymn book, it's number 57. I invite you to stand and embody your spirit.
Jesus.
Go now in love. Go now as a people with arms wide open to the world. Go now as a people who know the quiet tenderness of the heart. The world needs you, and you make such a difference. Go in peace, be in peace. See you next week.
Have a good day. Tempos, huh?